welcome back to the Schmitter's 100 Acre Woods. Today we're going to be talking about some of the smaller tools that we use at the 100 acres. So notice some of the chainsaws, go through some of the different items they have here, explain which ones we take every time we go out there, which ones we only sometimes take, and kind of why we take them, and kind of each of their uses. So some of them are fairly obvious, like the chainsaws. Other ones I'll go into more detail. Join me while I go through some of the different items we take and their functions. Alright, so I'll kind of start by doing just a quick overview of what each item is and then kind of go into more detail. So here on the left we have a couple of cables, so these are chokers. Next we have 3 Wood-Mizer branded items, so we have 2 Cant hooks of different sizes and a Hookaroon. Have a couple of battery operated Milwaukee chainsaws, and then we have 3 different Stihl chainsaws. So kind of going into more detail for each of these. So the hook, or the chokers, are meant for getting a tree out of the woods. So on the end they came with the chain on here, so you could clip it onto a hook. We've since added hooks on so that you can just hook it onto a D-hook or something like that and be able to pull items out. So I've done some modifications to those. These are very handy. Before just using cables and chains, the cables you'd have to push through, loop around, make a hoop on the end, whereas these, with these pieces already on there, it's much easier. Next we'll go into the Cant hooks and the Hookaroon. So the Cant hooks, if you're not familiar with what a Cant hook is, it is for getting a hold of a log and being able to rotate it. So the reason that these are Wood-Mizer is they sell them to use with their sawmills, and we will be using it for that function when we get our sawmill, but right now we're using it just in like a log yard to roll logs when cutting them up. You can roll them and then cut the other side of the log off. So we have a 60-inch and a 48-inch. The separation, or the two differences, basically the 60-inch just gives you more leverage. If you have a bigger tree, you don't have to work as hard to get the thing rolled over. Next up is a Hookaroon. So the Hookaroon is it has a point on the end, and basically you swing it to put the hook into a log end. So this is like if you've already chunked out the logs for firewood, you can swing this, put the point end in, and then be able to pick up a piece of firewood that way, or a log to split in the firewood. It helps save your back and gives you a little bit of reach so that you're not having to bend over as much to pick up logs or anything like that. So haven't used it a whole lot. These 3 are relatively new, so still getting used to kind of how to use them and incorporate them into everyday use. These 2 things we take every time, and started taking some of the Cant hooks and Hookaroon just to kind of play with them and figure out how they work into our process. So we do take a couple of electric chainsaws. So this is an M12 version. It's just a 6-inch bar. So this we use for going out into the woods and doing vine management. So it's very light, easy to carry around when you're working through the woods. You can just take this with you, go off and start cutting vines. So the small bar and lightweight is very handy for that. The other item that we take every time is this M18 Milwaukee chainsaw. So actually very impressed with how this chainsaw operates. It is very handy for limbing out trees. Not necessarily a product you want to use to cut up an entire tree, but for limbing a tree out, being able to cut a few limbs, set the saw down, and either pile up the brush or put the brush into a brush pile. It's very handy where you're not just having the thing make noise the entire time and have that kind of going in the background. It is very handy for that, and it's actually very good on battery life. if we're doing a lot of sawing where you're actually using this to cut up logs into firewood size, 16-inch pieces, you can go through a couple batteries, but normally you can easily go, a day on a battery for that. And both of these do have oil reservoirs, so some of the electric chainsaws out there by different brands don't actually have oil reservoirs, and you have to oil the chain separately. Both of these have them built in, so as long as you fill up the reservoir, every day or every other time you use it, you don't have to worry about chain life or anything like that. It's all built into the saw like the others. We have the 3 saws here. So to start with, we have an O24 Stihl, an MS391, and then we have the O46. So of all these saws, we'll typically take 3. So we'll take the M18, take the O24, and the 391. To the woods without at least 2 saws. So anyone who's done much cutting up firewood knows that it is easy to get a saw stuck. If wood gets piled, and it can kind of get bound in different spots where you may not expect it. So we always go with at least 2 saws. We'll always take these 2. If we know that we're going to be doing something a little bit bigger, we'll take this 391. And if we know we're going to have a really big tree to cut up, we'll take the O46. So this one has an 18-inch bar. I believe this has a 20, and then this one has a 24. So as you can see, the O24 is one of the oldest saws we have. The O46 we bought next, and then the 391 is a relatively new saw. Each of them kind of have their function. The O24 is probably one of my favorite ones to use, just because it's lightweight, still has plenty of power, and can do most tasks. You can run it all day without killing yourself because it's not super heavy. The 391 starts to get a little bit heavier. It does have more power, so if you're going through bigger logs, it is good for that. And then of course the O46, it is the biggest one that we currently have, and it after a couple hours of using it or cutting up a tree, you can definitely start to feel it. It's just between the weight and then with this big bar, there's a lot more of the control there. So definitely has its purpose, but doesn't necessarily make the trip to the property every time, just because we're not always cutting up items that big. Things here are these wedges. So these have become very beneficial when trying to fell a tree. So once you get partway through, and most of the time you can kind of identify which direction the tree is going to go. And right now at the property, for the most part, it doesn't really matter which direction. We don't have any buildings there, and there's nothing that it can hit and damage. Now if we don't want it to get caught up in another tree, or we want it to fall a specific direction just so it's easier to pull out, we'll use these wedges, and just they live in one of the boxes of the chainsaw. You can drive these in to get the tree to fall in the direction you want. Kind of the main items that kind of make the trip with us to the property every time. So as I've kind of explained in the past, right now we are at the 6-acre homestead with the house and everything. To go over to the property, it's about a 40-minute drive, and we have to pack up everything in the truck and the trailer to take over. So these are a few of the items that we take every time, or take often, just as needed. So again, kind of the recap, these go with us every time. The Wood Miser tools we've started taking, they're relatively new, kind of playing with those to figure out how they work in the process. We'll take the M12 Milwaukee saw if we're doing vine management. The M18 and the O24 always make the trip over with us, so that we always have a couple of saws. And then the 391 will go if we have some bigger things to cut down. And then the O46 if we have some really big trees that need to be cut. Thank you for joining me while talk about some of the smaller items we take. So a couple videos ago did the Kubota Army. So here's mostly the Stihl Army above to the Kubota Army video, if you want to check that out. Something I may do in the future video is do some comparisons of actually running these chainsaws. So I'll get some logs over here or over at the property, kind of run each of these chainsaws and kind of show some comparison between the three or the four of them if you want to include the M18. You can get back out to the 100 acres, do some comparisons with each of these saws and kind of do an up close run through of each of them. Thank you for watching, and we'll catch you next time on the Schmitter's 100 Acre Woods. Make sure to like and subscribe and so I can keep growing the channel.